Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're exploring the Macho Paradox by Jackson Katz.
Oh, interesting.
It examines the relationship between masculinity and violence prevention.
Okay.
You know, we often hear about violence against women as like a women's issue.
hmm
Is that really the case, though?
Well, Katz would say no.
Okay.
He challenges that idea by saying that men aren't just the perpetrators.
Yeah.
They actually hold a key to the solutions as well.
So how are we supposed to kind of shift our thinking then?
Well, he argues that framing it as solely a women's issue kind of lets men off the hook,
Oh, okay.
and it perpetuates the cycle.
Gotcha.
And so he really wants us to recognize that men play a part in both perpetrating
Okay.
and preventing this violence.
So are you saying instead of like asking women how to avoid being victims,
Mm-hmm.
we should be asking men what they're doing to prevent themselves from being perpetrators?
Exactly.
Wow.
He illustrates this point with a really powerful classroom exercise.
Okay, tell me more.
He divides the room by gender, and then he asks the men,
Okay.
what steps do you take daily to prevent being sexually assaulted?
Oh, wow.
And the reactions are very telling.
I'm guessing they don't have a list of like precautions.
No, not at all.
Okay.
He describes it as stunned silence,
Oh, wow.
followed by nervous laughter.
Interesting.
Men just don't even think about it as a threat that they need to actively avoid.
Right?
This really highlights the difference in how men and women navigate the world and how they perceive the threat of violence.
It does sound like a real eye-opener.
Yes,
I'm sure a lot of people listening are having aha moments right now.
definitely.
So does this tie into the idea that men who commit violence are like
Yeah.
somehow different from normal guys?
That's another misconception that Katz tackles.
Okay.
He calls it the myth of the anomalous perpetrator.
What's that?
It's this idea that men who commit these acts of violence
Okay.
were like isolated monsters or social deviants, basically outliers,
Gotcha.
And he says we can't just dismiss them like that.
So he's saying they're not outliers.
Exactly.
Okay.
He argues that these men are actually products of our culture,
Right.
that we're all shaped by these norms and expectations around masculinity.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So then how do we explain why people have such a hard time like acknowledging how big this problem is?
Well, Katz wants us to look at some of the psychological mechanisms
Huh?
at play that allow people and society to deny how widespread violence against women is.
Okay.
Facing this truth can be disruptive.
Yeah.
It can force people to confront some really uncomfortable realities about how complicit they are.
Is he saying we're all directly responsible for these acts of violence?
Well, not necessarily directly,
Okay.
but he highlights desensitization.
What does that mean?
Through constant exposure to violence in media and personal lives,
Yeah.
you just become numb to it,
Okay.
which contributes to this widespread denial.
So are you saying that becoming more aware of how violence is normalized is part of the solution?
Absolutely.
Okay.
He emphasizes that listening to women's experiences
Mhm.
is super important to
Right.
gain a deeper understanding.
Mhm.
He talks about a female friend who told him about her experiences with harassment from truck drivers.
Oh, wow.
This encounter really changed his perspective,
Interesting.
made him see things in a whole new light.
I'm sure many of our listeners have had similar experiences
Yeah.
where hearing someone's story really broadens their perspective.
Mhm.
But how do we connect this back to this culture of masculinity?
Well, Katz delves into the dynamics of male peer groups
Okay.
and how they shape attitudes and behaviors.
Okay.
These groups establish norms,
Okay.
often rewarding aggression and dominance while punishing sensitivity and empathy.
So it's like an unspoken code for how men are supposed to act.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sociologist Michael Kimmel calls it a homosocial enactment.
What does that mean?
Basically, men defining themselves in relation to other men.
Okay.
So you have this constant reinforcement of those traditional masculine norms.
So they're performing for each other,
Mm-hmm.
which reinforces the very behaviors that
Yeah.
contribute to the violence.
Exactly.
So how do we break that cycle? Does Katz offer any solutions?
He discusses the bystander effect,
Okay.
where individuals are less likely to intervene in situations when others are present.
Right.
He challenges men to become active bystanders,
Okay.
using their influence to disrupt and prevent violence.
Mm-hmm.
He actually uses the case of Kitty Genovese,
Oh, right.
who was murdered while dozens of witnesses did nothing,
Right.
as a way to illustrate the devastating consequences of inaction.
It's a chilling reminder that staying silent can be really dangerous.
It is.
But intervening can be so intimidating,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about like deeply ingrained cultural norms.
Right.
So how does he address that?
Well, he acknowledges that there are complex intersections of race, ethnicity, and culture with gender violence.
Okay.
He cautions against making generalizations about entire cultures,
Mm,
but emphasizes the importance of holding men accountable, regardless of their background.
okay.
He contrasts media coverage of the Central Park rampage,
Okay.
which involved primarily men of color,
Right.
with the Woodstock 99 assaults,
Hmm.
which involved mostly white men,
Yeah.
to highlight how bias shapes perceptions
Right.
of both perpetrators and victims.
Yeah. So he's basically pointing out our biases and assumptions. Does he talk about any other forms of media?
He critiques pornography.
Oh, wow.
He analyzes how the industry portrays women.
Okay.
He uses some strong language
Right.
to emphasize how it normalizes men's pleasure
Okay.
and sexualizes women's degradation.
Wow, that's intense.
It is.
It sounds like he's arguing that these portrayals contribute to a culture that sees violence against women as like normal,
Mm-hmm.
acceptable even. So does he have any solutions to address that?
He advocates for prevention and education as crucial tools.
Okay.
He believes in creating programs that challenge harmful stereotypes,
Okay.
promote healthy relationships,
Mm.
empower men to become agents of change.
So it's not just about punishing after the fact.
Right.
It's about looking at the root causes.
Exactly.
Interesting.
He actually co-created the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, or MVP,
Okay.
which uses sports as a framework to engage men in these efforts.
That's a cool approach.
It is.
Utilizing that male culture
Mm-hmm.
to promote a more positive view of manhood.
Exactly.
Um, does he give any other concrete steps that men can take to be part of the solution?
He concludes with a call to action,
Oh.
urging men to be more than just bystanders.
Mm.
He encourages them to support survivors,
Okay.
refuse to condone sexist behavior, and to get creative with their activism.
He even highlights initiatives like the White Ribbon Campaign,
Mm.
where men pledge to never commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women.
Right.
So it sounds like he's envisioning a future where men are actively dismantling the systems
Yes.
that allow this violence to occur.
Absolutely.
So how do we get there?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
While he lays out the roadmap,
Okay.
it's up to all of us to implement those ideas.
He's certainly given us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about these practical steps they can take.
I think so.
But before we get into that,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be good to summarize the main takeaways from this first section.
I agree.
I think a concise 10-point summary would help our listeners
I think that would be really helpful.
to really understand these concepts.
Absolutely.
So why don't we distill Katz's argument into 10 key points?
Sounds great.
Number 1, violence against women is a men's issue,
Mm-hmm.
requiring men to actively participate in solving it.
Number 2,
Eh,
perpetrators are not isolated monsters, but products of a culture that condones and normalizes violence against women.
Number 3, denial and desensitization prevent us from truly seeing how big of a problem this is.
Number 4, listening to women's experiences is essential for men to understand the impact of their words and actions.
Number 5, male peer culture has a strong influence on shaping attitudes and behaviors
Mm-hmm.
related to masculinity and violence.
Number 6, the bystander effect highlights the need for active intervention to stop violence.
Number 7, race, ethnicity, and culture intersect with gender violence in complex ways,
Right.
but we need to stay focused on holding men accountable.
Number 8, media and entertainment often contribute to a culture that normalizes and trivializes violence against women.
Number 9, prevention and education are essential for getting to the root of the problem
Mm-hmm.
and promoting healthy masculinity.
And finally, number 10, men have the power to become allies and agents of change by supporting survivors, challenging sexist behavior, and teaching young men about healthy relationships.
That's a powerful list.
It is.
And it really underscores that we all have a role in building a safer world.
We do.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
In the next part, we'll dig deeper into Katz's proposed solutions,
Okay.
and we'll explore what each of us can do to create a world free from violence against women.
Sounds good. So that 10-point summary we just went over
Right.
really lays the groundwork for understanding the key ideas in the Macho Paradox.
It is a lot to take in,
It is.
but having those points as a framework
Right.
will help as we continue to explore Katz's ideas?
I think one thing that's really interesting is how he connects
Okay.
these seemingly like separate issues
Okay.
back to violence prevention.
Can you give me an example?
Well, take his discussion of pornography and prostitution.
Okay.
He doesn't see those industries as simply exploiting women,
Right.
but as actively shaping a cultural climate
Okay.
where violence against women is seen as acceptable,
Yeah.
even normal.
And he uses some pretty strong language
He does.
when describing those portrayals.
Yeah.
Like his analysis of the pornographic representation of women as cum-guzzling whores.
Right.
It's pretty jarring.
It's meant to be.
Okay.
He's trying to expose how such imagery desensitizes viewers,
Okay.
particularly men,
Right.
to the humanity of women.
Mm-hmm.
It reinforces this idea that men are entitled to use women for their own pleasure.
And he ties this back to violence
Yes.
by saying it cultivates what he calls rapist values
Exactly.
in boys and men.
He argues that this repeated exposure can really warp people's perceptions of healthy sexuality
Right.
and relationships.
So it's not just about individual choices.
No.
It's about recognizing that these industries have a societal impact.
Exactly.
What about other forms of media?
Well, he also critiques the glorification of pimps
Okay.
in popular culture,
Right.
saying it sends a dangerous message about masculinity, equating
Yeah.
it with power and control over women.
So this language then
Mm-hmm.
furthers the normalization
Yes.
of the exploitation of women by
Exactly.
making it seem natural.
Precisely.
So he's asking us to be more mindful
Yes.
of the language we use
Yes.
and the messages it sends.
Absolutely.
If we accept this idea that these industries are harmful,
Okay.
what are the solutions?
He doesn't give easy answers,
Oh?
like advocating for censorship. He
Uh-huh.
emphasizes critical thinking
Okay.
and education.
Gotcha.
He wants people to understand how these seemingly private choices connect to this larger societal problem.
So it's about raising awareness
Yes.
and allowing people to make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
This brings us back to his call for men
Mm-hmm.
to be proactive
Right.
agents of change.
He offers a lot of suggestions for how men can step up.
Can you give an example?
Well, he talks about challenging the best man at a wedding who told a sexist joke.
Oh, right.
It's a powerful example of how men can use everyday interactions
Okay.
to interrupt those harmful norms.
Yeah, it might be awkward,
It might be.
but silence just means complicity.
Or even approval.
Right, so we all have a sphere of influence,
We do.
and we need to use it for good.
Exactly.
But it's not all about individual actions either.
No, he also calls for systemic change.
Okay.
He advocates for policies that address the issue
Okay.
and increased funding for violence prevention programs.
So it's this multi-pronged approach.
It is.
Individual behavior and societal structures.
That's right.
I really liked what he said about men teaching young men about healthy masculinity.
That's so
It
important.
feels crucial.
It is. Boys need alternative models of manhood.
Right.
Ones that value respect, empathy, and equality.
And he sees a big opportunity for this in sports,
He does.
which is interesting because it's often seen as this bastion of traditional masculinity.
Right. But his work with the MVP program
right.
really exemplifies this.
Okay.
It shows that we can use the language and culture of sports to engage men in violence prevention.
So it's like reclaiming that space
Mm-hmm.
and changing what it means to be a real man.
Exactly. Showing that strength and compassion can coexist.
Katz argues that this work takes courage
It does.
and a willingness to challenge the way things are.
Absolutely.
He even talks about how homophobia
Yeah.
can prevent men from speaking out against sexism.
It's a really important point.
Okay.
He observes that men who challenge traditional masculinity
Hmm.
are often labeled as gay or unmanly,
Right.
which stops them from engaging in these important conversations.
It creates this climate of fear
Yeah.
where men are afraid to step outside of
Right.
what's considered acceptable behavior
Exactly. It keeps those harmful norms in place.
and prevents us from making progress.
Yes.
So how do we move forward?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. What can our listeners actually do?
Well, Katz suggests being creative,
Okay.
finding ways to use their talents and platforms
Okay.
to raise awareness,
Mhm.
promote change,
Can you give some examples?
like comedian Chris Kilmartin,
Oh, yeah.
who uses humor
Right.
to challenge traditional masculinity.
Okay.
Or the White Ribbon Campaign, where
Right.
men pledge to never condone violence against women.
Those are great examples,
They are.
showing all the different ways men can contribute.
Yeah, it's not just about protesting or donating.
Right.
Though those are important too.
Right.
It's about living these values every day.
Yeah.
Consistently challenging sexism when you see it.
Speaking up, when someone tells a sexist joke,
Mm-hmm.
supporting women in leadership roles,
Yes.
examining the media we consume,
Exactly.
being good role models for younger generations.
Got it.
It's about being aware of how our actions affect the world around
Sure,
us
absolutely.
and being willing to have those tough conversations.
Even when they're uncomfortable.
Right. Kat says this isn't about making men feel guilty.
No.
It's about empowering them to be part of the solution.
It's about recognizing that men have an important role to play in creating a world where women and girls can live free from violence and fear.
As we get into the specific steps people can take, I think it's important to say
Yeah,
this work can feel really overwhelming.
it can.
It's easy to feel like the problem is just too big,
It is.
but we have to remember
Okay.
that even small actions can have an impact.
They can?
We don't need to be perfect,
Right.
but we do need to be willing to try.
And to challenge ourselves and others.
Katz reminds us this isn't a sprint,
No.
it's a marathon
It takes commitment.
and a willingness to keep learning.
Yeah.
So before we move on,
Okay.
let's take a minute to think about what we've talked about.
Right.
What really stood out to you?
I think his point about listening to women's experiences
Mhm.
and believing them,
That's so important.
it is. Their voices need to be heard and validated.
Exactly.
And their experiences are so valuable
Right.
in guiding our efforts to prevent this violence.
I was also really moved by his call for men to be vocal and visible allies.
It's not enough to just have the right views.
Right.
We need to actively challenge sexism wherever we see it. It's
Right.
about going beyond passive allyship
Right.
and becoming active agents of change.
So as we go into the next part,
Okay.
let's each consider
Okay.
how we can turn these ideas into action.
Okay.
How can we all help create a world
Yes.
free from violence against women? Knowing we can all contribute to making a difference is really encouraging.
Katz provides us with a great starting point, but the hard part is putting those ideas into action.
He's really big on this idea of commitment, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. It's about more than just surface-level changes.
Right. It's about examining those deeply held beliefs and behaviors.
Exactly, and challenging them within ourselves and with the people around us.
And he also talks about how important self-reflection is.
Yeah, he wants men to confront their own biases
Okay.
and see how they might have played a part in this culture of sexism.
So it's not about blaming anyone.
Right, it's about understanding. And once you have that understanding,
Okay.
you can start taking more effective action.
So men need to grasp the scope of the problem and their role in it.
To really become advocates for change.
He also mentions the importance of men supporting each other in this, right?
He does. He recognizes that challenging these norms can be tough.
Yeah,
Men need support.
right. They need allies.
Exactly.
And he talks about this need for more male leadership.
Yes, he sees men as having this responsibility
Okay.
to influence other men,
Mm-hmm.
to use their positions to advocate for change.
So it's more than just changing their own behavior.
It is.
It's about holding other men accountable, too.
Absolutely. Creating a culture where sexism isn't tolerated.
It's about men calling each other out.
Right.
Right.
Breaking that cycle of silence.
Mm-hmm.
It's about speaking up when you hear a sexist joke.
Okay.
Supporting women in leadership roles.
Right.
Really examining the media you're consuming.
And being good role models.
Exactly. Being mindful of how your actions impact others.
We also have to acknowledge the progress that's been made, though.
He does. He sees more men speaking out than ever before.
So it's a hopeful sign.
It is, but there's still a long way to go.
Right. So we're at a turning point. We have awareness and people are willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
But there's still so much work to be done.
It requires continued effort from everyone.
So as we wrap up this exploration of the Macho Paradox,
Okay.
I want our listeners to feel empowered.
Yeah,
Change is possible,
it is.
but it requires us to be committed and courageous.
And willing to challenge the way things are.
CADS has given us the tools,
A framework.
and it's up to us to use them.
We can all be part of the solution.
Let's work toward a world where violence against women is never accepted
Or excuse.
or ignored.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We hope it sparks some important conversations.
And inspired you to take action.
Keep learning
Keep questioning.
and keep fighting for a better future.
For everyone.